Hello everyone, my name is Rajni Jha. Welcome to Drishti IAS. So I hope I'm audible and visible to all of you. Can somebody confirm if I'm audible and visible? Then we can start the session today. Again, very important session. This is about UPSC Mains 2026 Essay Paper. I will be giving you the first reaction, what kind of questions were asked. So I'm sure you know that the UPSC CSE Mains 2026 Essay Paper has just concluded, and there are some essay topics in this because this was an essay paper. We will discuss them, and I will tell you what kind of questions have been asked this year. But before that, can you just confirm if I'm audible and visible to all of you? Yes. Hello, good afternoon, Prashu. Yeah, good afternoon. Okay. Am I audible and visible? I am. All right, great. So we'll have a look at the questions that they were asked. We'll have, let's take a first look and understand what kind of paper it was and what exactly this paper was testing, that the candidate should be prepared with what kind of questions, what kind of mindset as well for this examination particularly. Yes, Pratyush. All right, great. There's a little lag, so let's see. All right, so I've got the confirmation. Let's get started with the questions that have been asked. The first question, the first essay question is, essay topic, the first topic. Right here. So as you already know, there are usually two sections. This year also there are two sections in essay paper, and this is the first section. Okay, as you can see, the first question is, the first essay topic is oxymoron reflect the ironies of life. In fact, if you look at all the essay topics that have been given this year, you will find that this paper is very philosophical. It is very abstract. Okay, beta Mohammed, we don't know if the essay is easy yet or no, right? We will just figure it out. But this year's paper, I can tell you one thing for sure, that it was very philosophical, abstract, and interpretation heavy. It depends on what kind of interpretation you have, what kind of mindset you have, and that's what you will also show in the essay that you write, right? So it will test you using very simple statements. In fact, I'll tell you about philosophical questions. The simpler the statement is, the more complicated the answer can get. So here also you'll see that all the questions, all the statements are very simple, but because they are very simple, there can be multiple dimensions that can come from that single simple statement. And this is, of course, philosophical, philosophy heavy, so you had to connect it with the real life examples also. The first essay point, the first essay topic is oxymorons reflect the ironies of life. Now, what is an oxymoron? Oxymoron is something that reflects two completely opposite ideas, two contrasting ideas. We say this memory is bittersweet. So you can see these are two contrasting ideas, sweet and bitter. This is an oxymoron. So oxymoron reflect two contrasting, two opposite ideas. And here the question says oxymorons reflect the ironies of life. So first you had to understand what oxymoron meant. So you had to talk about apparent contradictions in life. What kind of contradictions are there? For example, in society, in a relationship, in politics. So there is democracy, but at the same time there is minority issues, right? Or in economy, you can talk about, we talk about growth, but at the same time there is a lot of inequality in the society. So you understand, this is the contrasting idea that you had to talk about from life, from the real life examples. So you could have taken different dimensions like society and relationship, right? Like politics and governance, you could have taken from economy, from technology. You just had to talk about the opposing ideas or the contrasting ideas. For example, in technology, what would be the contrasting idea? That at one point, at one hand, technology connects us all, but at the same time, we see there are so many cases of loneliness. Now people are more lonely. They are lonelier than they were earlier. Now they are more connected and yet they are lonelier. Right, so this is the opposite idea, contrasting ideas. You had to talk about these in the first essay. Second is, a grateful mind is very beautiful. As you can see, again, the statements are very, very simple. But because they are very simple, there can be so many dimensions that you can pick up. Right, I'm also looking at your questions here. Right, okay, so in this question, in this essay, what you had to talk about, mainly you had to talk about being grateful, the value, the idea, the mindset of being grateful. A grateful mind is very beautiful. So you had to talk about being grateful and how gratitude, what is, first of all, what is gratitude? What does it include? like it includes humility, it includes empathy and contentment, right? Then where you can show attitude at individual level, you can gratitude, sorry, you can show gratitude at individual level, at family level, at society level, then in leadership, in public services, in whatever you have in life, right? And the counterpoint would be here, of course, you will give some counterpoint also, right? So you should be grateful about everything that you have and the society itself, but at the same time, there are some injustices in the society. There is inequality in the society, and you can't be grateful about that. So being grateful does not mean you accept inequality, you accept injustice. So you could have talked about this here. Next is a thorn is a changed bud. Again, very abstract, very philosophical, but a very simple sort of a statement. What is a thorn? Thorn is a changed bud. What does that mean? Basically, they're talking about transformation. In this essay, in this essay statement, they're talking about transformation or growth. That whenever you talk about transformation or growth, it always results from some sort of adversity, some sort of problems. When you face adversity in life, that leads to transformation, that leads to growth. That is why they're saying a thorn is a changed bud, right? So here you could have talked about the adversities, like pain leads to growth, or how failure, you can, whatever you can learn from failure. You can see these things in nature also, right? You could have given the example of nature. The same thing happens in nature. At the same time, you could have talked about society. This in society also, that there is conflict in society and that leads to changes. The conflict leads to institutional reform. There are positive changes as a result of social movement. So initially there can be adversity, problems, and that leads to positivity, that leads to some transformation, some growth. That's what you had to talk about in the third essay. If you have chosen this to answer. I'm also looking at your answer. Subjectivity, objectively, and holistic perspective matter more in these kinds of questions. Yes, exactly, because these are very subjective. And mindset and ideology of every person is different. So here, your answer should have been very holistic. Your essay should have been very holistic, but at the same time, it should have covered every dimension that's possible. Because, as I told you, in philosophy, the simpler the statement is, the more dimensions it can carry and more subjective and complicated the answer can get, right? Next is, when two elephants fight, it is a grass that gets trampled. Again, what kind of question is this? You can simply understand this very easily. And because it is easily understood, better understood than the rest of them, there's a risk that this becomes very predictable. All of you would have written some sort of the same thing, right? For example, what does it mean? Two elephants, that means people who are powerful. When there are powerful people, powerful actors, it is the grass that gets trampled. The grass here would be people who are not so powerful in the society, vulnerable groups. So when powerful actors come into picture, vulnerable groups suffer. This is what it meant. And you could have talked about geopolitics here. You could have talked about politics, economy, right? Environment, social conflict, that vulnerable sections usually have disproportionate benefits, or they don't have benefit at all because the powerful section takes the major chunk of it. So when two elephants fight, when the powerful people are in question, they are fighting, always the vulnerable is the one who's getting affected. We should connect eco-politics. Yes, different dimensions, exactly. Next section, we again have fifth, which is nature is the symbol of spirit. What does it mean? Again, a philosophical, very open-ended sort of a question. Here, they are talking about nature. Nature is the mirror of human spirit. And here you could have talked about beauty, you could have talked about interconnectedness in both the dimensions, right? You could have talked about human and nature relationship. At the same time, you could have also talked about environmental crisis versus the environmental crisis that you see. We also have the same sort of crisis in human life, spiritual crisis or moral crisis, right? Then when we talk about cities or technology, there is alienation from nature. So you are connected to nature, but at the same time, there is alienation also. You could have picked up that part as well, right? Next is, a well-educated mind is will always have more questions than answer. Now, of course, again, I would say this is a very good question, but it is very broad. It allows example from different dimensions, whether it is education, democracy, governance. So here you can talk about, let's say, if you talk about education, education is not just about collection of facts and information. You should be curious. That's what it said, that well-educated mind will always have more questions. So you should be more curious. It's not just about spoon feeding. It's not just about that people, you get information from various sources. You have questions, more questions. You could have talked about curiosity, critical thinking in this essay. Then you could have talked about You could have taken Socrates, for example, and scientific temper in this essay. At the same time, you can talk about in democracy, you can question authority. In governance, what would you do? There is evidence-based policy, because you can simply say this policy is there, but if you don't question the policy, how would you see whether it works or not? Right? And if you question it, then you should have evidence to support it. So you can go for evidence-based policy in governance. Then you can also give counter points here, that education gives answers also. Education does not simply mean that we keep questioning everything. Something like that you could have answered. And then is shelving hard decisions is the least ethical course. What does that mean? We keep avoiding difficult decisions, hard conversation, difficult conversations. But what this especially says, that when you talk about ethics, hard decisions are important. And in this, you could have used governance angle also. Ethics angle and governance angle both could have been used. For example, when you talk about leadership or administration, the leader has to take difficult decisions or hard decisions, right? Then you could have talked about the ethical action of ethical effects of inaction, the ethical consequences of inaction, that you have to take hard decisions, hard actions. If you don't take them, then what can happen? What are the repercussions? You could have talked about that as well. What happens when people postpone difficult choices? You could have written that here, right? And how this can also have an impact on the vulnerable sections if you are not taking the hard decision, whoever is at the leadership position. So you could have talked about all these things here. And the last is, a good leader is one who follows the followers. Now, again, interesting topic and very contemporary leadership themed topic. Here what you could have written is, when you talk about leadership, leadership is not just about command and control. Whatever I say should be done. No, it's not just about that. In fact, leadership is about, here the word they have used, following the followers. What does that mean? That you should listen to the people that you are leading. You should have empathy, compassion and responsiveness. You should have accountability. You could have talked about all these things here. You can talk about especially democratic leadership. You can talk about in public administration, especially, you can talk about citizen-centric governance. You can talk about that here, right? In fact, social movements, that they emerge because leaders are not listening to the followers, or leaders are not listening to the people that they are supposed to lead. So you can talk about all these things here, right? You can use examples. Yes, exactly, Rishabh. You can use examples also. Okay, now this was just the first reaction. I hope you've understood that here you can see the questions are very abstract, very philosophical heavy. I'll also come up with a detailed session on this where we'll discuss what should be the dimensions that should be used in all these essays, how you could have approached it. I'll come up with a framework for this essay paper. But for now, my first reaction would be very abstract paper, very philosophical paper, which makes it difficult to mark, very subjective to mark. So I will see you with the detailed strategy on this and the detailed analysis on this in some time. But until then, if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. Yes, do you have any questions? So you should have understood by this, all these questions, that you have to develop your mindset and critical thinking. You can't answer an essay paper just by mugging up facts. That's not possible, because they're asking about your opinion, and all the questions that were given here, all the essay topics that were given here were actually checking what kind of person you are, what kind of thought process you have, right? You can't write about gratitude if you don't practice gratitude in your life. How much would you fake? There's only a limit to faking or pretending. So this is checking you what kind of a person you are, what sort of philosophical inclination you have, right? Yes, no, I'll come up with a detailed session on this where we will talk about all these essays in and the strategy, what should be the strategy, what should be the framework of answering these essays, and what should be the different dimensions of answering these essays. But until then, if you have any questions, you can always drop them down in the comment section below, and I'll come up very soon with the detailed strategy and analysis of this essay paper. So that's it for today's session, at least for now. Until the next time, take care.